About 2 years ago, I made a video talking about Kagurabachi and it becoming Shonen Jump's new ace. However, Shueisha took that video down in about like 3 to 4 days. It didn't last that long in the algorithm. And so from then, I thought that I would never talk about Kagurabachi again because that was my first copyright strike. Not a claim, a strike. And those are serious. And so I generally didn't know if I would ever make a video because at the end of the day, Kagurabachi is just one series. There's plenty of stuff to talk about at the end of the day. And I'm not just going to risk my channel. At the very least, that's what I thought for the past like 2 years. But I decided to take a gamble. The first half of this video is going to be that video from 2024. So if there's stuff that is outdated, is because it's pretty much almost 2 years ago at this point, from July. So all I ask is basically to keep that in mind as you watch the video. And the second half is pretty much a new recording and me talking about everything after the Rakuzaichi arc. So yeah, I just want to give you guys my full thoughts on part 1 of Kagurabachi and not let basically a video that I made almost 2 years ago be lost media, because I really was proud of the work that I made. So I decided to change things up a bit so that Shueisha doesn't get mad at me again. So yeah, thank you guys for the recent support. I really appreciate it and enjoy this video. So whenever there's a huge popular manga Weekly Shonen Jump on their way to the finish line, there's always that question: what series is going to pick up the mantle? What new series is going to keep the magazine afloat? And while that conversation can definitely be somewhat unfair to other series in the magazine that have stayed without massive levels of popularity, the question does come from a valid place. Series like One Piece, a true titan of the medium of manga, can finally be said that the other end of the tunnel can be somewhat seen with where it is currently. Jujutsu Kaisen is in its final climatic stretch where things seem extremely dire for the majority of the cast against Sukuna, and My Hero Academia, probably by the time you're seeing this video, has already, if not on its way to concluding. With all of that being said, while Weekly Shonen Jump does have plenty of series that will more than likely maintain the magazine's success and popularity, you can't help but wonder what series will be thrown into the limelight. What series will be the one that gets heavily relied upon and be on the cover of the magazine on a consistent basis? What series will be Weekly Shonen Jump's ace? If you haven't been living under a rock the past couple of months and you also have read the title of this video, then your mind should have already arrived at a particular series, and that is of course Kagurabachi. But how did we get here, and why out of all series Kagurabachi? Well, we can't really answer those questions without first talking about the massive elephant in the room that was one of the biggest factors in the rise of popularity for Kagurabachi, and that is of course the memes. Looking back with hindsight, it is very interesting to see how the power of satirical memes that were at the expense of Kagurabachi at the time without even having a single chapter out yet, and only the classic official art that we have all seen one way or another, truly ended up helping the series get mainstream attention that it wouldn't have had normally. That isn't to say that the series wouldn't get any attention, as it was going to be released on the most popular manga magazine in the world, but I can't really help but feel that the memes truly helped the series get advertised and reach so many people that wouldn't have checked the series out in other circumstances. But as much as the memes got attention, and oh boy were they entertaining to witness, that alone wasn't going to guarantee the survival of Kagurabachi, even more so with how Weekly Shonen Jump has built a reputation of axing series off the magazine that doesn't meet their expectations without any sort of hesitation. And that is how we get into the meat and potatoes of this video. With the power of viral memes, Kagurabachi propelled itself into consistent popularity and appreciation with none other than the story itself. You know, when I made my previous Kagurabachi video, I was really stuck in a rock and a hard place on whether or not this series was going to succeed. Seeing what felt like a true enigma coming out of absolutely nowhere with the start that it had was very difficult to predict if the series truly was going to last. Then you also added to the fact that Takeru Kazono, the author of Kagurabachi and a true rookie in the manga industry, was behind the wheel of the series. The uncertainty was amplified even more. The only thing you can do in that situation is just to wait and see what transpires. And as someone who was cautiously optimistic on what this series was trying to achieve, I can say with zero doubt in my mind that Kagurabachi is one of the strongest starting series I've seen in the magazine currently. The series only has almost 2 full arcs under its belt, and so much has already happened in the span of less than 50 chapters, it's actually overwhelming to talk about everything a little bit. First we have to talk about Chihiro, yes, that is his name, and not Kagurabachi. Anyways, at the start of the series, we see Chihiro to be this edgy guy who is on a path of revenge for his father's murderers, and we get the classic panel of him saying that he wakes up every day looking at the mirror to start the morning with fresh hatred. But this panel looks so unbelievably funny in hindsight, as ever since the first chapter, we get to slowly see that Chihiro is actually a really nice person behind his very cold exterior. The introduction of Char and her very rough predicament has Chihiro drop what felt like this facade of being a hateful person and rather someone who is willing to do what it takes to protect others. And that character progression goes from him trying to save Char to even currently in the series as the auction for the enchanted blade Shinichi is going on. This very writing decision is what has made Chihiro to be this very rootable and enjoyable protagonist that doesn't feel like he is entirely submerged in meaningless edge just for the sake of it, but rather passionate for his ideals and what his father told him at the beginning of the series in regards to swords, and that is katana should be wielded by those dedicated to vanquishing evil and protect the weak. With how important Chihiro's father Kunishige was, being the inventor of the enchanted blades, many people have different perceptions of who the man was and what his ideals were, despite not knowing him. And that is where we get the first antagonist of the series, and in my opinion what has made the series a true lightning in a bottle for Weekly Shonen Jump, Genichi Sojo. As the weekly reading experience of Kagurabachi went on, the moment where we would get a taste for what the series entails with its villains was inevitable. It was coming, but I don't think anyone was prepared to see a character as raw and as unapologetic as Sojo be the first one. I would dare argue that he had a presence so large with the short amount of time he ended up being present in the story, you would think he would be a long-term villain. To put it in a word, Sojo was a pure honest-to-God menace. Absolutely unhinged. And I absolutely loved it. From the first moment we see him in action up until the very end of his journey, Sojo truly was a captivating antagonist to see in every panel he was in. No time was wasted on Hokuzono's part to establish Sojo as a threat to the cast of characters in the story and his motivations that drove him to be who he is. The parallel that gets created between Chihiro's perception of his father and Sojo's is actually genius, as the words that Kunishige said in regards to the responsibility of forging katanas is massive, as you don't know in whose hands they might end up and what they can cause, are made crystal clear now. And as his son, Chihiro has to put a stop to Sojo to not only save and protect Char, but to also prevent Sojo from murdering his father's name and what he truly believed in as a swordsmith. The fights that take place in the beginning portion of the series are absolutely hype, no questions asked, but I want to touch upon something that is very important when it comes to manga, and that is the art and paneling. As I mentioned earlier, Hokuzono doesn't really have much experience when it comes to being an author, let alone an illustrator, but despite that, the growth this man has shown as chapters has gone by is very inspiring to say the least. The art has never been outright bad at any point, but you can tell that Hokuzono is learning as each chapter releases. But the moment I myself realized that Hokuzono in the series that is Kagurabachi might be the series Weekly Shonen Jump has been looking for is the final fight between Chihiro and Sojo. A fight that technically only took 12 seconds had me absolutely glued into every single panel. A conversation about Sojo's convictions and why their fight holds meaning in between their clash was absolutely breathtaking in every sense of that word. The paneling and how things get layered for your eyes to see felt so unbelievably seamless and showed so much skill and understanding on what makes a manga enjoyable to read down to its very roots. And the scary part of all this is that Hokuzono doesn't stop to improve when it comes to this. Even as recent as the fight between Chihiro and Kiora Sazanami has Hokuzono add a few tiny pieces of perspective when it comes to showing how their physicality goes, which makes the fight that much more climatic and impactful to the Rakuzaichi arc. And speaking of that arc, well, the Rakuzaichi auction is something that gets introduced early on in the series as something that was going to be extremely important in order to get one of the many enchanted blades. This arc is what made me definitely a true believer of Kagurabachi and the depth the series does have with the introduction of Akuri Sazanami, a guy who was disowned from the Sazanami clan for being particularly weak in comparison with his siblings. He ends up being the target of abuse, and when he ends up bonding with one of the prisoners he is supposed to guard for the Rakuzaichi, we actually see a moment where he is the one imprisoned by his family's expectations as a Sazanami. When we first see Hakuri, his weakness couldn't be more apparent, but the moment we see Hakuri awaken his abilities after being disowned and looked down upon by his family is one of the most satisfying moments I've seen in quite some time. The way in which Kagurabachi builds characters up lets them connect with one another in a very organic manner, and once the payoff comes, it doesn't feel like a random writing decision that was just done for the sake of making things interesting in the moment, but rather an elaborate decision that genuine thought was put into it before setting it up. With everything that I've talked about in this video regarding Kagurabachi, I have to end the video with this. Despite how much the series has progressed and the once very satirical attention the series had because of memes has now turned into genuine praise, deservingly so, we cannot forget that the series is on its early legs. Things can fall off later on, and Kagurabachi is not an exception to that whatsoever. But when you look at everything the series has accomplished in such a short span of time, like getting Masashi Kishimoto, the author of Naruto, and the very person that inspired Takeru Hokazono to become a mangaka, recommended this series by the 3rd volume, is something you can't help but look at and think that the series is truly something special. The waves that this series has made in the West was something that even Japan couldn't ignore. That in no way, shape, or form is normal. We potentially are witnessing a story that, if the quality stays consistent or improves even further, might generally become an absolute juggernaut, and the story that Weekly Shonen Jump has been looking for to be the next big thing that keeps the magazine at the top of the industry. Even more so if later on the series gets blessed with a faithful and gorgeous anime adaptation, and that is why I believe Kagurabachi is truly Shonen Jump's new ace. Now, despite everything that I said thus far, I ended up dropping Kagurabachi, not because I fell out of love, but simply out of circumstance. I'm someone who could read a manga for weeks and have a good time and just stop reading it randomly simply because I felt that way. It just happens. Because of that, I missed out on half of the weekly serialization of part 1, and as I was waiting on chapters to stack up, all I could see was the Kagurabachi community losing its entire mind. I want to take the time to shout out a certain individual on Twitter by the name of Observer. He has been responsible for making memes that are so funny you could literally get away with using them as reaction images for any online conversation. I find the progression of Kagurabachi memes so fascinating because you can see how at the beginning people were laughing at the series, but ever since Observer started making the memes, people started to use memes as a way to appreciate Kagurabachi and have fun as a community. That speaks volumes at the change in perception the series had, and the anticipation wanting to find out how that came to be, and seeing the origin of these memes was killing me. So to end 2025, I sat down and binged the entirety of Kagurabachi up until that point, and holy shit, I don't have the words to describe what an incredible experience this really was. To say that I was left impressed would be an understatement. I would go as far as to say that Kagurabachi has become one of my favorite manga of all time. Let me explain something about myself for a second. I love sword fighting. You can have a series with hand-to-hand combat, and of course that will be very impressive when you see it well animated with a good anime adaptation, but the concept of sword fighting was always much cooler to me. The stances, the clashes, the abilities, you give me all of that and I'm more than likely going to be on board. That is why I enjoy series like Gintama, Bleach, Vagabond, Demon Slayer, Hell's Paradise, why characters like Yuta and Maki from JJK appeal so much to me, simply focusing on how they fight. So when you have all the rawness from sword fighting and just have non-stop fights, like everything post Rakuzaichi Arc, I will be a huge fan. And even more so when the plot and the characters are the most engaging they've ever been. The Sword Bearer arc is what directly follows the Rakuzaichi arc, as Shihiro joins the Kamunabi in what is a temporary alliance in order to break the deadlock between the Kamunabi and the Hishaku. This is where we get introduced to Soul Bearer's Yuji Uruha and the beloved Seichi Samura. After going through the entirety of this arc, Samura is easily one of my favorite characters of all time. I truly can't believe how awesome this guy is. Samura is what I consider a quintessential character that perfectly reflects the world of Kagurabachi as a whole. With Samura, we get to see the ramifications of the Seitei War, as his character is all about the guilt from it all. The fact that he lost his sight not in battle but by blinding himself speaks volumes. The battle between the Kamunabi and the Hishaku is very fierce, and even though Shihiro's fight with Hirohiko was amazing at highlighting the difference between Shihiro and his enemies when it comes to killing, I couldn't help but be drawn by Samura and what his role was going to be. From his fighting style using hearing in order to fight, and the Masumi clan being his subordinates who are ninja capable of fighting alongside him without making much noise, everything about Samura captivated me early on. So when the betrayal happened in front of my very eyes and saw Samura seemingly kill Uruha, I completely lost it. Even worse, Chihiro sees his body on the ground. The same man that Chihiro respected back when he was a kid, now witnessing him betray everyone. It was an absolutely incredible moment. Samura joining the Hishaku in an alliance of their own made things even more complicated than they were before. Just when I thought things couldn't get better, that's when we get introduced to Iori Samura, Seiichi's daughter, who he separated himself from after wiping her memories, giving Iori a completely different life. Why would he possibly do that? Because he couldn't bear the idea that because of his sins, his daughter would take her life. All of this is just absolutely grim. Something that I love is the connection that is made between Iori and Chihiro, as he wonders the life he could have had if he didn't burn himself with all of this, but instead went to school just like she did. And we see one of my favorite pages in the entirety of Kagurabachi, as Chihiro says he wouldn't change a single goddamn thing, as both him and Kunishige are inside the fishbowl. A portrayal of meaning and emotion that is so very simple while being extremely effective. With that, this is the perfect segue into talking about the hotel section of this arc, because Jesus Christ, Takeru Kokuzono's evolution as a mangaka jumps tenfold from where he was at the beginning. The fights here just feel so raw and brutal to witness, while at the same time being so incredibly seamless. I can't help but be impressed at the precision of his paneling whenever fights kick into high gear, while still having the creativity to make them enjoyable to read. The fight between Hirohiko, Chihiro, and Samura in the hotel just felt like Hokuzono reached nirvana. I was left speechless countless times here that, to be honest, I don't have the words to say despite this being a scripted video. This just speaks for itself, really. I genuinely cannot wait to see the anime adaptation of Kagurabachi, and with Cygames being the studio behind it with stuff like The Summer Hikaru Died and the beloved Uma Musume franchise under its belt, I don't think it's crazy to say that the series is in very safe hands. If you are doubtful, then please give Uma Musume Beginning of a New Era a watch and see the animation of that movie. Then come back to me and say if you still don't trust Cygames Studio. Samura's character comes full circle, as his goal the entire time wasn't to kill all sword bearers brutally, but to simply kill the sword master behind the Chinuchi, also known as the Magatsumi, pretty much sacrificing himself instead. The fact that Chihiro was dead but got brought by Bazuzaku intentionally alongside Uruha later on says it all. Samura is willing to go as far as to break the chains of all the sword bearers, push his own daughter away from it all in order to take the burden and end all remaining ties to the Seitei War. This made Samura such a compelling character to me, and when Chihiro finally has a chance to confront him personally, we get a fight that emotionally impacted me and turned me into a full-on Kagurabachi believer. Tobimune versus Enten, in my eyes, is the picture-perfect fight, as it was less about the physicality and put the focus on both of their resolve. Samura tries to push Chihiro away, saying that he shouldn't be concerned with any of this, and yet Chihiro wants to not only make Samura want to live, but also show that he is capable of destroying the Chinuchi. The Masumi clan also appeared to help Chihiro as they go against Samura. Everything about this fight just was crafted perfectly, and it made me reflect back to Chihiro versus Sojo. Back then, I I thought this was a lightning in a bottle moment for Hokazono, but this ended up being the damn standard in retrospect, as the climax of both Samura and Chihiro reached their peak here and makes the fight with Sojo, a fight that I once looked so fondly, look like small fry in comparison. Thanks to Chihiro proving his resolve to take on the burden of his father's enchanted blades, he's able to figuratively and literally open Samura's eyes to a future where he's there for his daughter after pushing her away. This was nothing short of spectacular, and it was the moment I realized that Kagurabachi really has become one of my favorite manga, period. I've personally seen enough. At least that's what I thought, until we get the long-awaited appearance of the man responsible for the massive genocide right after the Treaty of the Seitei War, Akemura Soga. The Kamunabi HQ gets invaded, and the fights that happen are bombastic and overall just incredible. We even get familiar faces back into the fold, but truly the series reached a new level of insanity for me as both Chihiro and Samura fight Soga. It was at this point where I caught up to Kagurabachi and was reading Weekly again. I couldn't help but be mesmerized by every single clash, the destruction occurring, and just the immense threat Soga was oozing from every page. And the fact that this fight is as brutal as it is, while both Chihiro and Soga are related, just adds the ultimate insult to injury. Stabbing Chihiro in the heart with precision and lack of care for his own nephew, Samura takes a last stand fighting against this absolute monster, as Chihiro, with his eyes of a swordsmith, looks on and absorbs everything in order to take him down the next time. Of course, Samura dies at the hands of Soga and is unable to be with Yori, but his death wasn't one of self-indulgent sacrifice. Instead, his death ends up being a gamble, putting all of his thoughts in the future in order to take down all the wrongdoings of the past. To me, this was an incredible send-off to a character like Samura and puts a stamp on him as one of my favorite characters in battle shonen. With Soga now completely on the loose trying to oversee Japan, part 1 of Kagurabachi comes to a close just like how it began, with Chihiro forging a new sword trying to surpass his father, as he now has the knowledge and the perspective to even the playing field as Kunishige Rokuhira's son. I truly am happy with how far this series has come. It truly feels like we're all witnessing a masterpiece of a painting come together as time passes. There isn't even an announcement for an anime adaptation or a trailer, and yet Kagurabachi, with just the manga alone, has been able to stand on its own 2 feet. Part 2 seems like it's going to dive even deeper, as it will be about the Seitei War. This is something that I wanted to see, but to actually see it happen blows my mind at how Takeru Hokazono simply just gets what we, the audience, wants to see next. Overall, this manga has impressed me so many times after the events of the Rakuzaichi arc. It is not only Weekly Shonen Jump's ace and a household name at this point, but also a body of work with potential to become a series that inspires many others after it. I am glad that I believed in this series from the moment it was announced to start serializing years ago. I'm glad that I could say that I was there when the first chapter was released, and I'm so glad that my belief in the story has paid off in dividends. Enough time has fucking passed. Kagurabachi is here to take over, and I cannot wait for what the anime will deliver once it finally arrives. These are my thoughts on Kagurabachi as a series at this point. I want to know what you guys think in the comments down below, as I'm very curious on what you guys have to say. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And with that, hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are. See you guys in the next one.